Johnnie Moore is widely known as just one of the nicest, greatest EQ people around. Every circle he's in gets better. He's also known as one of the smartest people, as an intellectual, as an academic, as a person who consults and advises at the highest level of our government. And then he's one of these guys that is just, he's on a mission. He is probably the leading voice in our world today on what Christians are experiencing in terms of martyrdom in some of the hardest places in our world to actually be a believer. His latest book, I love it so much. It's called The Martyr's Oath. I love the subtitle, Living for the Jesus They're Willing to Die For. Isn't that amazing? Would you please give a huge Bayside welcome to Johnnie Moore, everyone.
Thank you. I've decided that everywhere I go, I'm going to invite Kurt to introduce me, beginning with to my family. So I am thrilled to be here. I love this church. I love the people of this church. Every time I get here, it's a blessing to me. I know a number of people that are here, and it's a special blessing that this week I don't have to come in and do just a random message. I get to actually continue in the series that you've just started in the book of John. So this is the third week in your study of the book of John. We're going to finish chapter 1 this week, and you're going to finish the book of John somewhere in the year 2027. So chapter 1, verse 19, I'm going to read you two excerpts because the Gospels are filled with the story of people finding and following Jesus, right? That's what the Gospels are about. And the people that are finding and following Jesus have different personalities. They're from different places. They're unique. Everyone is in many ways different from the other. So while there are multiple people involved in this last part of chapter 1, I'm going to highlight two for you today, John the Baptist and Nathanael, at the beginning and at the end of this section of Scripture. So John chapter 1, verse 19, you don't have to read. You can just listen to me if you want, but feel free to read along. Verse 19. Now, this was John's testimony when the Jewish leaders in Jerusalem sent priests and Levites to ask him who he was. He did not fail to confess that I am not the Messiah. So the Jewish leaders, they asked him, well then who are you? Are you Elijah? And he said, I'm not Elijah. They said, are you a prophet? Nope, I'm not a prophet either. Finally they said, well, who are you? Give us an answer so that we can take the answer back to those who sent us to you. So what do you say about yourself? Who are you? John replied by quoting the book of Isaiah, the prophet Isaiah. He said, I am the voice of one calling out in the wilderness, make straight for the way of the Lord. Now the Pharisees who had been sent, they questioned him, and they said, well, if you're not the Messiah or Elijah or a prophet, then why are you baptizing people? John said, I baptize with water, but among you stands one you don't know. He's the one who comes after me, the straps of whose sandals I am not worthy to untie. That phrase, the straps of whose sandals I'm not worthy to untie, we'll come back to. And then verse 45, totally different person, totally different story. Philip, verse 45, found Nathanael, his friend. So he followed Jesus, he went to get his friend Nathanael, and he told his friend, we have found the one that Moses wrote about in the law, and we found the one that the prophets wrote about, Jesus of Nazareth, the son of Joseph. We found him. So Nathanael replied, Nazareth? Can anything good come from Nazareth? I live in Orange County. This is what we say about LA. Come and see, Philip says. Well, just come with me. I'll show you. I'll introduce you. So when Jesus saw Nathanael approaching in the distance, Jesus said to him, well, that's an Israelite in whom there is no deceit. He's saying, that's an honest guy. That guy speaks his mind. So how do you know me? Nathanael asked. So, did I see you at the bar? Were you down on the street? Like, did we run into each other? Like, how do you know me? They never met each other before. And Jesus answered, he said, I saw you while you were still under the fig tree before Philip called you. And then Nathanael declared, Rabbi, you are the Son of God. You are the King of Israel. We'll come back to that. To understand the significance of John the Baptist, you have to understand the significance of what was going on in that part of the world in the time period that this was written. It was a turbulent time. Rome had come in and taken over that entire area for a generation now. The Romans were vicious and they were powerful, and if anybody tried to revolt, they would subdue it in an incomprehensible way. In fact, a generation from this, there'll be 1,000 Jews crucified on crosses as the Romans tried to put down a rebellion. Eventually, they tore down the whole temple, stone after stone after stone. They would massacre people in cold blood in every direction if they rebelled against them. It was a dangerous thing to have the Romans in charge. And in the meanwhile, there was a religious and political establishment among the Israelis in that time period, and they disagreed about how to handle the Roman incursion into their area. You know, some of them were more religiously devout, some of them were more politically attuned, and they argued back and forth as to how to handle it. But when it all really came down to it, the religious and local religious and political leaders were basically just trying to keep the top on the kettle because it was boiling over. Any minute there could be a problem, a rebellion, a crisis. And Rome was fine unless there was a rebellion or a crisis, and then they would just, without discrimination, they would massacre everybody, they'd destroy everything. And so all these men and women in Jerusalem, they just wanted to do one thing: keep the peace. And they cut deals, and they did like, people in Washington, D.C. do. They just did everything they could do. So there's a real problem when you have this rogue religious teacher out in the wilderness a few miles down the road, and his preaching and his teaching is a little extreme. It's like hellfire and brimstone type preaching. And hundreds of people are following him. So the religious establishment in Jerusalem, they don't know where this is going, but every time there's been a rebellion or an attempted rebellion against Rome, every single time it came from this area. And so they dispatch a group to have an intervention. And they go figure out who this John the Baptist guy is. And all these people are following him, and he's a popular figure, and he's increasingly powerful. And so they go out and they say, okay, John, who are you? Are you the Messiah? Are you Elijah? Or are you a prophet? Now, they weren't saying that because they thought he was any of those things. They were just trying to figure out what kind of crazy he thought he was. Kind of like, some of you dads when your daughter's like 16 and it's the prom, and that she thank God, is going to the prom with the nicest guy in town, the most integrous person, best family. But still, when he showed up at your house, you had already made up your mind he was evil and deserved to go to hell. It was just a matter of how evil he was, and that's how this was. It's like, we know this guy's a bad guy. We know something's going on here. We're going to go check it out. So they went and they interrogated him and said, who are you? Who are you? Who are you? Now, it's interesting when they said, are you Elijah? Because he kind of looked like Elijah. In the book of 2 Kings, Elijah was someone that was hairy and covered in camel hair, and he had his loins girt about him, kind of like some of you ladies, your husband now compared to when you married him, and his loins girt about him, all that stuff. Sorry. And they asked him, who are you? Who are you? Who are you? And there's this like subtle thing that he does. You almost miss it. He points to Jesus. He says, oh, I'm not him, but he's here. Are you the Messiah? No, I'm not the Messiah. I came to point at the Messiah. Last week you had that verse, I am not the light. I came to reflect it. He says, I'm not the guy, but the guy is coming. Now here's the thing. Like, this is not human nature, right? This guy's influential, he's powerful, he's leading hundreds and hundreds of people. Like, if it were me, I would say like, oh no, I'm not the Messiah, he's coming, but I'm kind of a big deal too, It's like, you see all these people, everywhere. That, he had a reason to have an ego. He was influential, he was powerful, he had all these other things. But to John the Baptist, he only existed for Jesus. This is the characteristic. I only got 2 points for you. This is the first one. The point is, John the Baptist had his eyes on Jesus. He didn't have his eyes on himself. He was selfless. He was focused on Jesus. And he had every reason to focus on himself. But he was focused on Jesus. This is his call to us, by the way, 2,000 years later. To us today in 21st century America, which is very self-centered. The whole world is self-centered now, right? We live in the Facebook world, and so you took the best picture you could possibly find of yourself and you put it as your Facebook profile picture, but you still use that brush up app thing, right? Because now everybody can be a supermodel. You just squeeze it and twist it and paint it and turn it upside down, and you're so unrecognizable. Your children accidentally followed your Facebook profile. They didn't realize they were following their mom. By the way, moms, you don't know how to use Facebook, okay? So, it's, anyhow, okay, never mind. Because but let me give you a tip, okay? Your kids are going to block you. It's inevitable. They're just going to block you, okay? They don't want you in their space. When they block you, just start putting all their childlike pictures on your Facebook page, because then they won't know you did it, because they can't see you. And you get your revenge, okay? Now your kids are going to hate me. That's okay. I can handle it. I lost my train of thought. No. In our culture that's so self-obsessed, right? I'm a millennial, right? The millennial generation, we invented the selfie stick, okay? We don't take pictures this way anymore. We take pictures this way, In our culture, you get a little bit of ground and you're expected to occupy that space, right? You get a little bit of fame and all of a sudden you start acting like a diva. Somebody gives you a high five and you're like, I'm pretty hot stuff. People compliment you and you believe it. You believe your own press clippings. Like, we live in a culture that rewards those who are focused on themselves, right? You climb up the corporate ladder on the backs of other people, right? You bring yourself up by your own bootstraps, right? And this is a beautiful thing about America. I'm not diminishing it at all whatsoever. But the American system, by the way, the free market, only works if it's built upon a self-governing moral people who will govern themselves, because the system can be taken advantage of. And as Christians, God calls us, and John the Baptist calls us. He says, get over yourselves and get your eyes on Jesus. And when you get your eyes on Jesus, you'll stop focusing on yourself and you'll start serving the world that's around you, that's in need. I mean, imagine this. There are 2 billion people on planet Earth that profess faith in Jesus Christ. 2 billion people. Like, why is there a need anywhere in the world? As Christians. The defining characteristic of our culture is self-preservation. You do whatever is good for you. Down in Hollywood, you have piles and piles and piles and piles of people that are working on like living forever. I don't know. It's like self-preservation is the obsession of everyone. Do whatever you can for you. But the first rule of the kingdom is self-sacrifice. You live for other people. You live for your family, for your children, for your community, for your neighbors. And it's not that you embrace some ascetic lifestyle and you deny yourself everything in the world. The truth is that most of us will never even get to that temptation, because we're so bad at just doing little things to help people. And yet we admire it, don't we? Don't you admire it when someone does something selfless for other people? I mean, it's Memorial Day weekend, for goodness sakes. We celebrate our heroes in this country that gave us the freedom that we enjoy here today. I can preach to you without fear of persecution or discrimination. I work with persecuted Christians all around the world. I'm telling you, don't take your religious freedom for granted. People died to give us this freedom. Amen. And we celebrate those people. Why? We celebrate them because they sacrifice themselves for other people. We admire this. And yet it's in the power of every one of us to do it ourselves. We might not sacrifice our lives, but what about a little bit of our time or our money or a kind word or a bit of generosity or a little less self-focus? This is our responsibility as Christians. This is what John the Baptist models for us. He was big stuff, but he knew that he wasn't God. By the way, this is insidious. It gets inside of you in a dangerous way. It showed up first in the very beginning of the Bible, in Genesis chapter 3, when a serpent came crawling. What was the serpent's temptation of Adam and Eve? You can be God. You can have all the power yourself. You can be the center of everything. But this is not Christianity. This is what destroyed and broke the world. And it's so hard. It's so hard. Every single day you have to work on this. I mean, I'm what you call a tent maker. Okay, I don't make tents, but my life is I own a business, and then I donate a percentage of my time. So I own a communications company, and I give about 30% of my time in issues that are important to me around the world, mainly related to persecuted Christians and religious freedom and humanitarian issues. And I spend a lot of time in Washington, D.C. and other cities around the world and all over the Middle East. Like I have... Sometimes when it's hard, I've just constructed my lifestyle so that I give a percentage of my time and energy and everything in those issues that I'm concerned about. So, I spend a lot of time on this stuff. And yet, do you know, it is every single day of my life. I just want to focus on me every single day. I mean, I had this scary experience a couple of weeks ago. I was in Washington, D.C., and I was in a meeting in the White House about prison reform. It's an issue I care a lot about because I think our prisons, shouldn't be warehouses of people. They should be focused on rehabilitating and helping people. People go in prison for a reason, and so rather than just keeping them in prison, we need to help them prepare when they get out, and so I focus a lot on this issue, and I was in this amazing meeting in Washington, D.C., in a very politically partisan and divided time where, everybody hates everybody all the time, and they figure out the reason later. They just start by hating each other, and yet I was in this meeting in the White House, and every Republican supported it, every Democrat supported it, every religious leader supported it, the president and Nancy Pelosi were behind it, and that's kind of like the parting of the Red Sea. It is stuff like, it was an amazing thing. It's an incredible bipartisan moment. Everybody's like, how do we help our prisoners so when they leave, they don't go back in because we've helped them rehabilitate? It's an amazing meeting. I was feeling kind of good about myself because I was involved in this in a big way and, all this stuff. I walk out of the White House and I'm going across Lafayette Park in Washington, D.C., and it's pouring down rain. I mean, pouring cats and dogs, okay? Just pouring. And I know, some of you that are from California, there's this thing called rain. It happens sometimes. Drops of water fall from the sky, okay? And this was like torrential rainfall. And I had my umbrella. So I'm feeling good about myself, coming out of the West Wing. I got my umbrella and my suit and my tie, and I'm walking back to my hotel, and sure enough, I walk past this homeless guy who's leaning against a fence, just sort of giving up, drenched, pouring torrential rain. And I think it was the Holy Spirit. It's like, I felt in my heart, like, God, it's like, give him your umbrella. And you know what? You know what my response was? I don't want to give him I'm not giving him my umbrella. It's my umbrella. And I started rationalizing it. I was like, he's homeless. Maybe he's like, there's all these shelters in Washington, D.C. There are plenty of places he could be. Like, why is he here? Maybe he's like just cleaning himself off. I'm like rationalizing. I'm rationalizing. And here I am. I'm such an incredible hypocrite. I spend 30-40% of my time like serving people, working in all these things. And here's like a guy right in front of me, and I'm fighting myself to do something as simple as giving him an umbrella. And I don't know how I did it, but by the grace of God, somehow, I think it's because I was only 2 blocks from the hotel. I gave him my umbrella. And do you know what he gave me? A look on his face I might never forget the rest of my life of gratitude. He was so shocked that someone would help him with something, so I gave him an umbrella. And I just it was too hard for me to do. My heart is so dark. Our hearts are so dark. Such a simple thing. It was so hard to do. And I remember just thinking, I'm walking back to the hotel the last couple of blocks. I arrive in this very, very nice hotel, my suit and tie, and I am drenched. I mean, my suit is like totally wet. My hair is, I'm just like dripping as I walk in. The woman felt sorry for me. She gave me a towel, as I walked in. And as she gave me a towel because I was going to, mess up the reputation of the hotel. And I walk inside the lobby, and then it hits me. That was the hotel's umbrella. So in order to help a homeless guy, I committed theft. It was great. So I walk up to the hotel. And these hotels, like you buy a candy bar, and that mini bar thing in the hotel, and it costs you your mortgage. Imagine how much an umbrella cost. So I end up buying the umbrella and all this stuff. But I've thought about that experience so often, and I thought about it when I was reading this text and looking at the story of John the Baptist, because it's like, it's so hard. And yet the one thing Christians ought to be is selfless. Oh, this is Nathanael, by the way, this other guy. I mean, John the Baptist has his stuff together, okay? He's like a preacher on the streets. He's assured of himself. This Nathanael guy, he doesn't have his stuff together, okay? He's like, no, ain't no way the Messiah is coming from Nazareth, okay? No way. And then this funny thing happens. I don't know if you're paying attention. Let me just recount the story again. Philip brings him, Nathanael. We found Jesus, we found the Messiah, his name, and that was good. Until that point, Nathanael was great. The Messiah's here. He said, yeah, his name's Jesus. He's from Nazareth. He's the son of Joseph. And like, Nazareth? Nothing good comes from Nazareth. He's prejudiced. So Philip says, just come and see. Okay, just come meet the guy. And Jesus sees him far off, and he says, I like that guy. He says what's on his mind. By the way, that was grace from Jesus. Jesus knew everything. That guy was a racist. Okay, he was a bigot. He had judged, no way on planet Earth the Messiah could come from Nazareth. Not a way on planet Earth. And you know what? Jesus wasn't so concerned about his present state as much as who he could become. He became one of the 12. He changed. But Jesus didn't write him off in the beginning. So I like that guy. He speaks what's on his mind. That's what that means in the text. There's no guile. And Nathanael said, wait a minute, how do you know me? And Jesus says, I saw you under the fig tree. You get that? You don't get it. Okay, I know you don't get it. It's so strange, isn't it? The fig tree. What was going on under the fig tree? Like, what did Jesus see? What was happening under the fig tree? You know, the Bible is inspired, every single word of it. So surely God could have told us what was going on under the fig tree. He could have said that, maybe Nathanael was like reading the Torah. A lot of times people would go under a fig tree. Historians tell us to read the Torah. Maybe he was in quiet reflection. Maybe he was depressed. Maybe he was contemplating, something. Maybe he was thinking something. We don't know. Maybe he was sad, happy. We don't know. Maybe confused. We don't know what happened underneath the fig tree. And the Bible chose not to tell it to us. Why? Because it's not important, the specific circumstance. What is important is this man who doubted Jesus ended up becoming one of his 12 disciples. He was a doubter. I know there are no doubters in this room. There's at least one, okay? See, if we would have picked these 12 disciples, we would have picked like the creme de la creme. We'd have gone over to, one of these like universities, over on that place over there, the Valley thing, or we'd have gone to Harvard, we'd have gone to like, who are the up and coming budding scholars? You know who Jesus picked? He instigated conflict. Do you know Matthew? Do you know what Matthew's job was? He was a tax collector. 2,000 years later, we don't like tax collectors, okay? But it was a different type of tax collection 2,000 years ago. This was corruption. You were collaborating with the Roman government. You would literally, Rome would say, bring back this amount of money, and whatever you make on the top, it's up to you. So everybody hated this guy, and he was a collaborator with the Roman occupiers. Do you know who also was in the 12 disciples? This guy named Simon the Zealot. Do you know what zealots were? This was a political party that believed in kicking out Rome even if they had to use force. Some of them were terrorists. They killed Roman soldiers on the side of the streets. They kept knives inside their girdle, and they take it and they kill Roman soldiers. Jesus, amongst the 12, he picked a Roman collaborator and an anti-Roman zealot. Here's the strange thing, 2,000 years later, God loves Democrats and Republicans. He loves every race and ethnicity. He loves people that like him, we like, and people that don't like us. He cares about all of us. He looks at our hearts. That's not that every idea is good or that those, I'm not, don't take this in other places. I'm just saying that God comes to you wherever you are, whatever your fig tree question is, whatever your fig tree hang up is. He wants you a part of his family. Now, I relate to the doubt thing. I got to tell you that. I relate to it. Maybe some of you relate to it too. I've been plagued by questions my whole life. I just have to know answers. And I never became an atheist. I never danced with atheism or agnosticism because there are like 2 billion people around the world that profess faith in Jesus Christ. 2 billion. So surely they're not all stupid, right? There has to be a reason at least to believe something. It's a matter of what you believe and whether it answers those questions. Like let me just give you an example. Like when I was a kid, or when I was in college, I did a lot of work around the world, and I've been to India many times working with orphans. And I remember flying to India one time, and I was transiting through an airport in Europe. And in this airport in Europe, there was a art museum, a miniature art museum kind of up this escalator on the second floor, and it's an art museum. And I did what every American does when they're in Europe. I ate at McDonald's, and I got all filled up with my saturated fat, and then I went to an art museum. And I went into this art museum, and I went inside, and it was a miniature museum. There were like 12 or 13 paintings, flowers or something. And I walked in, and there was this lady, and she was like looking at the corner of one painting. Just the corner. And I remember going through the whole art museum, like 10 minutes later, and as I was leaving, that lady was still looking at the same corner of the same painting. So what did I do when I left? Did I say, she's crazy? No. I asked myself, what does she know about this painting that I don't know? What does she know about the painting that I don't know? By the way, Nathanael, the doubter, might have had a very good reason to doubt. You might have a very good reason to doubt. I'm not judging you for doubting. I'm not judging you if you have a hard time accepting God because some horrific thing happened in your life, maybe that people know or don't know about. I'm not judging your doubting of God because on this Memorial Day weekend, it's a time of celebration, but for you, it's a time of loss, and you got big questions about that. And I don't think God judges that. I just think God doesn't expect you to get all your stuff together and have all your questions answered before he wants to start blessing you on this journey to faith. I think he's got room for the doubters in the kingdom. I see this really strange thing. When a crisis happens in our life, we lift our hands to the sky and we say, God, why? Right? We ask God, why? Isn't it weird that we have enough faith that we know he has the answers to the questions, but we don't have enough faith to just trust him? We have enough faith to ask him why, but not. Sometimes we think we need answers, but what we actually need is God. God. See, we have a doubting complex in the church. I mean, I was raised in South Carolina, okay? So I'm now raising my kids in California. I have a 5-year-old, a 3-year-old, and 1-year-old. Very different experience, okay? I mean, when I was in South Carolina, it was, let me just give you an example. My 3-year-old little girl, the other day I asked her what she wanted for her birthday. And she said, solar panels. So that's what, solar panels. So, my 1-year-old little boy, who's the most Californian of our children because he was born in our house, not on purpose, okay? And that's for another sermon, but let's just say that I now demand my staff call me Johnnie Moore, MD. So, because I did all the hard work, It's like, it was. He the other day was drinking this smoothie, and it had chia seeds in it. And it's like chia seeds. Like in South Carolina, seeds are meant to like plant, not eat. Like it's different. But in South Carolina, I when I was a little kid, I had this Sunday school teacher, and when I was maybe 7 or 8 years old, and I've carried this thing with me my whole life almost. She was teaching on doubting Thomas. You remember him? If you don't remember him, after Jesus rose from the dead, he appeared again to like 500 people, and he's appearing in this room. They call it the upper room. You can visit it in Israel, in Jerusalem. I've been there. And every disciple believed that Jesus had risen from the dead, except for this guy Thomas, one of the 12. And he walks in, and he says, no, I'll believe if I can touch the wounds, then I'll believe. And I remember this Sunday school teacher teaching, like, Thomas was bad. He was the doubter, doubting Thomas. Don't ever be kids like doubting Thomas. But the problem was, it's like life got hard on and off again. I remember I was 12 or 13 years old. My parents went through a traumatic divorce. We ended up going through lots and lots of things I don't have time to tell you about. But I remember having this crisis of faith even as a little kid, and that story came back to me, and all these questions, all these doubts, everything. And it's like, it caused me a crisis of belief. And I carried it with me. I carried it with me into college. And then one day, I think by the Holy Spirit, I had this epiphany. And here's what the epiphany was. Doubting Thomas, he wasn't the worst of the disciples. He was the only disciple that touched the wounds of Jesus. He had the most intimate experience with Jesus of all the other disciples. His doubt led him to the deepest faith, not the most shallow faith. He just didn't want to have the experience of Peter or John. He didn't want to say like Peter saw Jesus and John saw Jesus and I believe Jesus. No, he's like, no, I want to touch his wounds. And later on, I went to India and I was in South India and I discovered there's a 2,000-year-old church in India. But India is not a Christian country, right? It's majority Hindu and Muslim and Buddhist. Very small, under 10% of the population is Christian. Yet there's a 2,000-year-old church in India. It's existed for 2,000 years continuously. Guess how it started? There was this apostle named Thomas who traveled further than any other apostle as a missionary. He died as a martyr and he started a church which exists today 2,000 years later. And I see him walking into one of those villages in South India saying, Jesus is the way, the truth, and the life. Put your faith, cleanse your sins. He rose from the dead. Believe in him. And they'll say, how do you know that's true? Say, I searched it out myself. I touched his wounds. See, there's this verse in the book of Hosea, I think, where it says, no, Job. It's at the end of Job. It says, my ears had heard of you, but now my eyes have seen you. Doubt is not a barrier of faith. It's a part of developing your faith. Just take the first step. Jesus doesn't expect you to have it all together. Trust me, there are answers to the questions. We're not dealing with all that today. Jesus is bigger than your doubts. But don't stay outside of the kingdom just because they're questions. By the way, persecuted Christians around the world have made me a bigger believer. There's a lady in Egypt. Her husband was one of those 21 Coptic Christians that were beheaded by ISIS in Libya. She was poor as anything. A news media guy came up, put a camera in her face after that terrible, tragic situation. And you know what she said to the camera? She said, don't worry about us. Jesus will take care of us. She's like that little woman looking at that painting in that museum. I don't say she's crazy. I say, like, what does she know about this faith I don't know? I don't know where you are. You might be John the Baptist. Belief comes easy for you. But his message to all of us is, for goodness sakes, like, please, could every single one of us just do something nice for a human being this week? Amen. Just to rip our selfishness out of us? But number two, like, if faith doesn't come so easy for you, I got good news for you. It doesn't have to. Jesus says to you the same thing he said to Nathanael. I see you. Come follow me. And we'll figure it out together. Jesus, bless these wonderful people, this amazing church, and thank you for your beautiful word. It's amazing to think we're like one chapter into this amazing, amazing book. I pray that you bless it and bless these people and help us to grow deeper in our relationships with you. We love you. Use us, please, to change the world. And don't let the world change us. Amen.